The year is 438 BC, and the city-state of Athens stands as the intellectual and cultural center of the Greek world. Under the leadership of Pericles, Athens has reached the height of its power, wealth, and influence, following decades of victory over Persia and the rapid expansion of its political system. The city now leads the Delian League, an alliance of more than 150 Greek polis cities, whose tributes flow annually into the Athenian treasury. These contributions, originally intended for collective defense, have transformed Athens into the richest and most dominant power in the Aegean, allowing it to fund large-scale public projects, a powerful navy, and an unprecedented cultural renaissance. And in the middle of the 5th century BCE, Athens contained more world-changing minds per square kilometer than any city in history. Philosophy, drama, art, politics, architecture, and historical thinking were all being forged in the same generation, often in the same streets by people who influenced one another directly or indirectly. You could see Socrates walking barefoot through the agora, stopping strangers with simple questions that slowly dismantled everything they thought they knew. You could hear Sophocles rehearsing a new tragedy that would redefine fate and responsibility, while Euripides was already questioning the gods themselves and placing human doubt at the center of the stage. Not long before, and still remembered in the city, the historian Herodotus had recited stories of Persia, Egypt, and the edges of the known world. You could see Hippocrates, the father of medicine who frequently visited Athens, observing the sick with calm attention, recording symptoms, rejecting superstition, and teaching that disease came from nature rather than the gods. Anaxagoras, whose ideas were still circulating among Athenian thinkers, had dared to say the sun was a burning stone, quietly undermining centuries of myth. It was in this same age that Phidias oversaw the final assembly of the colossal Athena Parthenos inside the Parthenon, the construction of which was just finished in 438 BC. The temple on the Acropolis was the most ambitious architectural project of classical Greece. Built entirely from fine Pentelic marble, it replaced an earlier temple destroyed by the Persians, transforming a site of past devastation into a symbol of revival and dominance. The building's very existence signals that Athens no longer sees itself as merely a small polis among many, but as the leader of the Greek world. Every detail of the structure is mathematically refined to achieve visual perfection, including the slight curvature of the floor and the subtle inward lean of the columns, adjustments that correct optical illusions and create a sense of harmony. These refinements make the temple appear perfectly straight and balanced to the human eye, even though almost no line in the building is truly straight. Inside the temple, the colossal chryselephantine statue of Athena, nearly 12 meters tall, 40 feet, was a marvel of beauty. Crafted from ivory and gold, the statue presents the goddess as both divine protector and military guardian, holding Nike, the goddess of victory, in her hand. The gold covering alone represents an enormous reserve of wealth that can be removed and reused in times of crisis, turning the temple into both a sacred and financial institution. Phidias is also responsible for the colossal statue of Zeus at Olympia, built 3 years later, which stood nearly 12 meters tall and was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a seated god of gold and ivory whose sheer scale made mortals feel small before divine power itself. Below the Acropolis, the true heart of Athens beats in the Agora, a vast open space where the life of the city unfolds from dawn until dusk. Here, merchants arrange their goods, philosophers gather students, and politicians address citizens in the open air, blending commerce, thought, and power into a single living organism. Farmers from the Attic countryside arrive with baskets of olives and figs. Craftsmen display bronze tools and painted pottery, and sailors fresh from the Piraeus bring news from across the Aegean. Athens is the birthplace of democracy, a system unlike anything the ancient world had known before. Power here does not belong to a king, a priesthood, or a single ruling family, but to the citizens themselves, who gather to debate, vote, and decide the fate of the city. Laws are proposed, generals are elected, and even the most powerful men can be ostracized and sent into exile by popular vote. For the Athenians, this is not merely a political system, but a statement of identity, a belief that a free citizen body, reasoning together, can rule more wisely than any tyrant. Yet this democracy is not the democracy of the modern world. Only adult male citizens born to Athenian parents may participate, a group that makes up perhaps a tenth of the population. Women, though essential to family, religion, and the continuity of the city, have no political voice and rarely appear in public life beyond festivals and funerals. Their world is the household, the oikos, where they manage property, raise children, and weave the cloth that clothes the city, unseen yet indispensable. Democracy, as Athens practices it, rests on their silence. Below even this excluded majority stands another, larger foundation: slavery. Tens of thousands of enslaved people work the fields of Attica, labor in workshops, row the ships of the fleet, and descend into the deadly silver mines of Laurion that fill the Athenian treasury. Their labor frees citizens to debate, to attend assemblies, to train in the gymnasium, and to sit in the theater. At the center of this system stands the assembly, the ecclesia, which meets roughly 40 times a year on the Nix Hill. At the end of every term, officials undergo a public audit, the euthina, where any citizen may accuse them of misconduct. No office is safe from scrutiny, and no power is unchecked for long. Even generals, the strategoi, though elected for their experience, must answer to the people and can be fined, exiled, or executed if they fail in times of war. One of the most famous victims of this system is Themistocles, the man who once saved Athens itself. 2 generations earlier, Athens had stood on the edge of annihilation. The Persian Empire, the greatest power the world had yet seen, stretched from the Indus Valley to the shores of the Aegean, ruled by kings who commanded millions and expected obedience from all peoples under the sun. When the Ionian Greek cities of Asia Minor rebelled against Persian rule, Athens made the fateful decision to support them, burning the city of Sardis and drawing the attention of King Darius himself. The punishment would come swiftly, and it would be total. In 490 BC, the first Persian invasion reached Greek soil. A vast expeditionary force landed on the plains of Marathon, expecting an easy victory over the small and divided polis of Greece. Instead, Athenian hoplites charged the Persian lines and shattered them in a single afternoon. The famous Marathon story comes from what happened immediately after the fighting ended, when the danger to Athens was not yet over. The Persian army had been defeated on land, but their fleet was already sailing to capture the unprotected city. The city was panicking, as many believed the Persians would be victorious at Marathon and were ready to surrender and open its gates. As the hoplites gathered their dead and watched the Persian ships vanish on the horizon, a messenger named Phidippides was sent to run from Marathon to Athens to announce the news before the Persians could reach the city. According to legend, he ran about 40 kilometers, 25 miles without stopping, reached Athens, cried out, "Nenike kamen, we have won," and then collapsed and died from exhaustion. The story became a symbol of endurance, sacrifice, and duty to the state, inspiring the modern marathon race. Although the victory of Marathon was astonishing, it was fragile, and every Athenian knew it was only a reprieve. Persia had not been defeated, only delayed. 10 years later, the storm returned. Darius was dead, and his son Xerxes marched west with an army so large that it seemed to consume the land itself. Numerous Greek cities surrendered without resistance as the Persian host advanced. Northern Greece fell, and at Thermopylae, a small Spartan force led by King Leonidas and his 300 bodyguards took their stand in the narrow pass between the mountains and the sea. For 3 days, they held back the vast Persian army, using the terrain to cancel the enemy's numbers and turning the pass into a wall of bronze and blood. When a traitor revealed a hidden path around their position, Leonidas dismissed most of the allies and remained with those who chose to die. Surrounded on all sides, the Spartans fought until the last man. Modern historians estimate that the total number of the Spartans and their allies were probably over 7,000 men, rather than just 300 Spartans, yet their stand against the Persians is still remarkable. When the pass finally fell, the road to central Greece lay open, and the Persian army poured southward like a flood. It was then that a man named Themistocles proposed a decision that would define the fate of Greece. He convinced the assembly that Athens could not be saved by its walls, nor by meeting the Persians again on land, but only by the sea. Years earlier, he had persuaded the citizens to use the silver of Laurion not to enrich themselves, but to build a fleet of triremes, fast and deadly ships powered by the manpower of thousands of rowers. Now, as Xerxes advanced, that fleet became the last hope for the Athenians and for Greece itself. Athens was evacuated, its women, children, and elderly sent to Salamis, Troezen, and Aegina, while the Persians marched into an empty city and burned the Acropolis to the ground. The temples were shattered. The sacred olive tree of Athena was cut down, and the heart of Athens seemed lost forever. Yet the fleet still lived, gathered in the narrow straits of Salamis, where the numbers of the Persian navy could not be brought to bear. There, in confined waters and shifting currents, Greek seamanship turned the size of the Persian fleet into a weakness. When the battle began, Persian ships rammed one another while trying to maneuver against the fast and mobile Athenian navy. Greek triremes struck from the sides, splintering hulls and drowning crews, and by nightfall, the sea was choked with the wreckage and bodies of the Persians. Xerxes watched the destruction of his navy from a golden throne on the shore, as the empire's power broke apart in the waves. The victory at Salamis saved Greece, Athenian democracy, and, in effect, the European civilization as we know it. The city that had been burned now rebuilt itself in stone and marble, and the memory of its destruction became a source of unity, pride, and ambition. Themistocles, however, did not live to see the full glory of the city-state he saved. Feared for his influence, he was ostracized by the same democracy he had saved. Exiled from Athens, he would eventually die far from the city he saved. His story remains a warning etched into the foundations of Athenian power. In Athens, no man stands above the people, not even the one who preserved their freedom. What followed was not peace, but a slow and inevitable fracture of the Greek world. The victory over Persia had bound the city-states together by necessity, but once the common enemy was gone, old rivalries resurfaced with greater intensity. Athens emerged from the wars as a naval empire, rich, confident, and ambitious, while Sparta remained a land power, conservative, militarized, and deeply suspicious of Athenian democracy and expansion. The balance that had once kept Greece stable began to tilt, and every polis could feel the strain. Sparta was unlike any other city in Greece. It was not built to impress visitors or to display wealth, but to endure. Sparta had no great walls for most of its history, as Spartans believed the spears of their warriors were their walls, and that stone defenses were unnecessary for a people who lived permanently ready for war. Even the Spartans themselves didn't look like other Greeks. According to numerous ancient sources, Spartans treated hair as a mark of status. After completing training and being accepted as full citizens, Spartans grew their hair long, which was a symbol of freedom and discipline. Herodotus writes that before Thermopylae, the Spartans calmly combed their long hair as the Persian scouts watched, mistaking the ritual for vanity instead of preparation for death. The brutal militarized culture of Sparta was created by a legendary Spartan lawgiver who starved himself to death to make his laws immortal. According to ancient tradition, Lycurgus reshaped Sparta from a divided, unstable city into the most disciplined society the ancient world ever saw, built not on wealth, art, or comfort, but on obedience, endurance, and absolute loyalty to the state. He banned gold and silver, replacing money with heavy iron bars that made hoarding wealth impossible and trade outside of Sparta humiliatingly impractical. These iron bars were so heavy and worthless beyond Spartan borders that no citizen could grow rich, bribe officials, or live in excess, forcing equality. Lycurgus went further, stripping away private life itself. Spartan men were forbidden to eat at home and were compelled to dine in communal mess halls, where kings and commoners shared the same black broth, bread, and meat. Lycurgus understood that laws written on stone could be erased, so at the age of 7, boys were taken from their families and enrolled in the agoge, the state-run system of training that stripped them of childhood and remade them into Spartan warriors. From the first day, the boys learned that they no longer belonged to their parents but to Sparta. They were grouped into packs, given a single cloak for the entire year, and forced to go barefoot in all seasons so their bodies would harden to cold and pain. They were starved, encouraged to steal, but beaten savagely if caught, not for theft, but for clumsiness. And if a boy cried, he was considered weak and not tolerated. As they grew older, the training became harsher. They were sent on night missions, the Crypteia, where they lived alone in the countryside with only a knife, learning to survive without shelter or help. By the time they reached adulthood, they were the most disciplined warriors of the ancient world, turning the Spartan army into an unstoppable force. Women, too, were trained for the state. Unlike in other Greek cities, Spartan girls exercised, competed, and trained publicly, because Lycurgus believed strong women would bear strong sons. They managed households, owned land, and spoke with a freedom shocking to outsiders. Marriage itself was stripped of romance and transformed into a breeding policy. Men married late in their physical prime, so their sons became physically strong. Newly married men saw their wives only in secret, slipping into their homes at night like thieves, because Lycurgus believed desire should be sharpened by restraint and never softened by comfort. Even after marriage, men continued to live in the barracks, eating and sleeping with their comrades, not their families. If a man was old or weak, the law allowed another, stronger man to father children with his wife, so that the state would not be burdened with frailty. Newborn babies were brought before the elders of the tribe, the Gerousia, who inspected the infant's body in silence. A baby judged weak, deformed, or unlikely to grow into a strong warrior was not allowed to live, because in Sparta, life was not a right, but a duty to the state. Lycurgus's laws did not only shape Spartan citizens, they also created one of the most brutal systems of domination in the ancient world. Beneath the disciplined order of Sparta lived the Helots, an enslaved population tied to the land, forced to feed a society that existed solely to train for war. Without the Helots, Sparta could not exist, and yet Sparta lived in constant terror of them. The Helots were not slaves in the household sense, but state-owned serfs, conquered peoples, mainly Messenians, whose land had been taken and whose freedom had been erased. They farmed the fields of Sparta and were required to give a fixed portion of their harvest to Spartan citizens, keeping barely enough to survive. They could not leave the land, could not bear arms, and could not escape their status, which was inherited at birth. Every meal eaten by a Spartan warrior was produced by Hela labor, as all Spartan men were warriors, not farmers. Lycurgus's system treated the Helots not merely as labor, but as an enemy population permanently under occupation. The Spartan state was so afraid of rebellion that it institutionalized terror as policy. Each year, the ephors, the 5 powerful Spartan officials who enforced the laws, formally declared war on the Helots, making it legal for any Spartan to kill them without religious consequence. Young Spartan men, fresh from the Agog, were sent into the countryside armed with knives and ordered to hunt helots and kill them silently at night. Lycurgus had created a state of warriors, but it stood on a foundation of slavery. Sparta was ruled by a unique dual kingship, unlike any other Greek state. At all times, Sparta had 2 kings simultaneously, each from one of 2 royal families. This system was designed to prevent tyranny by forcing the kings to balance each other's power. The kings were hereditary monarchs, but their authority was limited. Their main role was military leadership. One king usually led the army on campaign, while the other remained in Sparta. In war, a king had near absolute authority over the army, though even then he was accompanied by ephors who could observe and later prosecute him if he overstepped his powers. Religiously, the kings were the chief priests of Sparta, responsible for sacrifices to Zeus and other gods before campaigns and major state actions. This gave them immense symbolic authority, as Spartan society was deeply religious and believed divine favor was essential to victory. When Lycurgus had finished shaping the system, he gathered the Spartans and made them swear an oath to obey his laws until he returned from a journey to Delphi. Then he left the city to meet the oracle at Delphi. The oracle of Delphi was the most feared and revered voice in the ancient Greek world, a place where mortals believed the gods themselves spoke. The sanctuary of Delphi was a small settlement high on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, overlooking the vast valley of Phocis far below. At the heart of the sanctuary stood the Temple of Apollo, and within it sat the Pythia, a woman chosen from the local population to serve as the voice of the gods. She sat upon a tripod above the sacred fissure where vapors rose from the earth. As she inhaled the god's breath, her body shook. Her voice broke into strange rhythms, and the priests translated her words into prophecies that carried the weight of divine command. When Lycurgus arrived, he asked only one question: whether the laws he had given Sparta would be beneficial. The oracle answered that Sparta would be unmatched in glory as long as it obeyed those laws without change. The message was everything Lycurgus needed and more. He sent a message to Sparta about the oracle's prophecy, reminding the citizens of the oath they had sworn. According to tradition, Lycurgus starved himself to death, ensuring he would never return, forcing the Spartans into an unbreakable oath and making his laws eternal. To Sparta, Athens was not a rival city. It was a disease wearing the mask of brilliance. Where Athens celebrated debate, art, wealth, and individual expression, Sparta saw decay. The Athenians filled their city with marble temples, painted statues, theaters, and philosophers, while Spartans filled theirs with silence, discipline, and steel. To a Spartan, Athens looked soft, noisy, and dangerously free. Spartans believed a city ruled by talk would eventually collapse under its own confusion, while a city ruled by law would endure forever. By 431 BC, Athens stood at the head of a maritime empire, wealthy, confident and protected by its long walls and unmatched navy. What had once been an alliance against Persia had hardened into rivalry, dividing Greece in a state of Cold War, leading to years of tension, proxy conflicts, and political humiliation, which eventually made war inevitable. When diplomacy finally failed, Sparta chose invasion. At first, the Peloponnesian War started with the Spartan army marching into Attica year after year, burning crops and villages, daring Athens to come out and fight. Athens refused. Under Pericles, the Athenians abandoned the countryside and withdrew behind their walls, allowing the land to be devastated while their fleet struck the coasts of the Peloponnese in return. Pericles was the brilliant strategos elected year after year to lead Athens. And long before the Peloponnesian War started, he had already prepared the city for this moment. It was he who launched the great building program on the Acropolis, raising the Parthenon, the Propylaea, and the temples and statues that proclaimed Athenian power in stone and marble. But his greatest monument was not a temple, but the most sophisticated defense systems in the ancient world, the long walls. Stretching more than 6 kilometers, nearly 4 miles, the walls ran from Athens to its ports at Piraeus and Phaleron, transforming the city into a fortified corridor permanently linked to the sea. Even if Attica was overrun, even if every field was burned and every village destroyed, Athens would not starve. Grain ships could still arrive from the Black Sea, warships could still sail out to strike, and the city could endure as long as its navy ruled the water. For a time, the strategy worked exactly as Pericles had intended. The Spartans marched in, devastated the land, and withdrew, unable to force a battle or break the walls. Athens, supplied by sea and secure behind stone, struck back with raids that humiliated the Peloponnesian coast and reminded Sparta of its weakness at sea. But then, a disaster struck Athens. In the second year of the war, as refugees crowded into the city behind the walls, a plague swept through Athens with devastating force. Pericles, blamed by the people he had led for decades, was fined and briefly removed from office, only to be re-elected soon after, but the damage was already done. In 429 BC, weakened by illness and grief, Pericles died, and with him died the steady hand that had held Athens together. Without his authority, the assembly became volatile, swayed by eloquent men who promised quick victories rather than endurance. For years, the fighting dragged on without resolution, and the war spread across the Aegean, to Thrace, the islands, and the shores of Asia Minor, pulling more cities into a conflict that now consumed the entire Greek world. Victories were costly, defeats frequent, and neither side could deliver a final blow. In 421 BC, exhaustion forced both sides to agree to the Peace of Nicias, a fragile truce meant to last 50 years. It was a peace built on mistrust. Armies never fully disbanded, alliances shifted constantly, and skirmishes continued under different names. The balance held only briefly before ambition shattered it. That ambition took form in Alcibiades, a man of dazzling intelligence, charm, and recklessness. He persuaded the assembly that Athens could still win everything by expanding the war westward, far from Sparta's reach. In 415 BC, the city launched the Sicilian expedition, sending its greatest fleet ever assembled to conquer Syracuse, a rich and powerful city. The expedition was meant to bring unimaginable wealth and secure final dominance, but instead it revealed how far Athens had drifted from Pericles' cautious vision. In 413 BC, the Athenian fleet was destroyed, the army captured, and thousands of prisoners were left to die in the stone quarries of Syracuse. It was the greatest defeat in Athenian history. From that moment, Athens fought for survival rather than supremacy. Allies revolted, tribute vanished, and Sparta, now funded by Persian gold, built a fleet to challenge Athenian naval power. A Spartan garrison at Decelia cut Athens off from its silver mines and countryside, while hunger and unrest spread within the walls. Democracy itself briefly collapsed under the strain, replaced by an oligarchic regime that ruled by fear before being overthrown. The end came in 405 BC, when the last Athenian fleet was destroyed at Aegospotami by the Spartan commander Lysander. With no ships, no grain, and no allies, Athens could not continue. A year later, the city surrendered. The long walls were torn down, the navy reduced to a shadow, and the Delian League dissolved. In the aftermath of the Peloponnesian War, Greece entered a long and uneasy decline. The great city-states were exhausted, their treasuries empty, their populations reduced, and their confidence shattered. Sparta, though victorious, proved incapable of maintaining leadership, ruling harshly and losing allies as quickly as it had gained them. And while Athens recovered its democracy, it never recovered its empire. Into this vacuum of power stepped Thebes, a city that had long lived in the shadow of its stronger neighbors. Thebes rose through a combination of revolutionary military tactics and exceptional leadership, mainly under Epaminondas, who changed how Greek warfare was fought. Militarily, Epaminondas introduced the oblique order, a concept that broke the centuries-old assumption that armies must fight in perfectly symmetrical lines, and instead, he used a deep phalanx formation concentrated on one wing, transforming Greek warfare from a contest of endurance into one of strategy and intellect. Alongside these innovations emerged the Sacred Band, a unit unlike anything Greece had seen before. It was composed of 150 pairs of male lovers, 300 soldiers bound not only by oath and training, but by deep personal devotion. The Thebans believed that a man would fight more fiercely beside his lover, ashamed to show fear and determined to stand his ground no matter the cost. In a world where most armies were temporary citizen militias, the Sacred Band was a permanent professional force, trained year-round and drilled to fight as a single body. In 371 BC, it was the Sacred Band that played a decisive role in shattering the Spartans. The Sacred Band was positioned on the left wing, where Epaminondas massed his troops in his unusually deep formation, striking directly at the elite Spartan right. When the lines met, the Sacred Band held firm and pushed forward with relentless pressure, breaking through the Spartan front and killing the Spartan king. The myth of the Spartan army's invincibility was destroyed in a single afternoon. The shock of the defeat echoed across Greece, and with it ended a century of Spartan dominance. After the battle, the Thebes marched into the Peloponnese, dismantled Spartan control over the region, and liberated the Messenian Helots, stripping Sparta of the labor force that sustained its entire system. Reduced in manpower, isolated diplomatically, and unable to adapt its rigid social structure, Sparta faded from great power status and would never again dominate Greece. While the Greek city-states tore one another apart in the Peloponnesian War and after, another Greek kingdom existed on the margins of their world, watching, learning, and surviving: the Kingdom of Macedon. But that's a story for another day. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, share it, and make sure to subscribe to our channel.